We'll look at Federalist number 63. This is the last Federalist paper that Madison wrote, and you'll see it's pretty long, and he's trying to make a statement. He had to go back to Virginia to try to get elected for the Virginia Ratifying Convention. And since he was one of the most, if not the most, informed person about the Constitution, he had to be there because Virginia was probably the most important state. It was definitely the most populous state. So if Virginia wouldn't ratify the Constitution, the chances are this Constitution would not be adopted. So he's again continue talking about the Senate. And remember, the word Senate itself, it's within the roots of it. When you look at the Latin root of it, it just means old age. So that's why they even chose this word, because it showed they want to give this body, this part of the legislature, some sort of constancy, some sort of permanence. The senators were going to be elected every 6 years. So this in itself, just using that word in itself would let the people, well-read people that were going to read these Federalist Papers at the time, to know that Madison, Hamilton, and John Jay were thinking of places like Rome and ancient Greece, and, especially Rome, to say that they had done their work, they had studied their history, and referring to history and what had happened in the past, they're trying to found a republic. So even the use of the word implies permanence, implies lessons learned from the old republics. So keep that in mind. Now here, remember in 62, he was directly and indirectly saying we need the Senate to keep an eye on especially the other part of the legislature, the House of Representatives. Okay, here, he in two different parts, in two different lines, he says there's another part that we need to be watchful over. Even though this is going to be a republic, even though we're basing a republic because we think our citizens are going to be virtuous, or we're hoping they'll be virtuous, otherwise this republic will not work. But you'll see in two parts, he'll say, passions will take over people, and you can't count on people being virtuous. So this is another safeguard. Having a Senate will have a check on the passions of people that we have seen over the course of history take over and ruin countries, ruin republics. At the very beginning of the paper, he's going to remind you that we want to be respected elsewhere. When he says lack of character, he's talking about lack of respectability, not having a good reputation. If we don't found the government that is going to have some semblance of permanency, then other countries are not going to respect us, and they're just going to run all over us. So let me start reading this. A fifth desideratum illustrating the utility of a Senate is the want of a due sense of national character. Again, respectability. Without a select and stable member of the government, the steam of foreign powers will not only be forfeited by an unenlightened and variable policy proceeding from the causes already mentioned. We've already talked about it in Federalist 62, he says, but the national councils will not possess that sensibility to the opinion of the world which is perhaps not less necessary in order to merit than it is to obtain its respect and confidence. Again, we want other countries, other powers of the world to respect us. Because remember, if they don't respect us, they won't play fair. They're not going to let us go and trade with them on a fair basis, on equal footing. They'll come and divide us, steal our resources, and just keep us from trusting one another here on this side of the ocean. And attention to the judgment of other nations is important to every government for two reasons. The one is that independently of the merits of any particular plan or measure, it is desirable on various accounts that it should appear to other nations as the offspring of a wise and honorable policy. The second is that in doubtful cases, particularly where the national councils may be warped by some strong passion or momentary interest, the presumed or known opinion of the impartial world may be the best guide that can be followed. What has not America lost by her want of character with foreign nations? And how many errors and follies would she not have avoided if the justice and propriety of her measures had, in every instance, been previously tried by the light in which they would probably appear to the unbiased part of mankind? Here he is referring to how the British were treating Americans at this time. Remember, the British and Americans signed the Treaty of Peace in 1783. Okay? And a lot of British merchants were, a lot of Virginians owed, this is Virginia right here, owed a lot of money to British merchants. And when these British merchants would sue the Virginians in the Virginia courts, a lot of times, because Virginia courts would issue judgment to the advantage of the Virginians, then the British were frustrated they were not getting their money. And that was part of the Treaty of Peace, that British will leave United States as soon as America and Americans paid their debts. So because Virginians were not paying their debts, right up here in the north part of New York, the British were still occupying those forts, and they were not evacuating them because they said, you're not living up to your part of the deal. So here he says, Madison says, look, they don't respect us. They don't get out of our lands like they're supposed to because we haven't respected our part of the bargain. Why haven't we respected our part of the bargain? Because we haven't had a good federal government to force the people living in the states to live up to their end of the deal. The next paragraph, yes, yet however requisite a sense of national character may be, it is evident that it can never be sufficiently possessed by a numerous and changeable body. Here he is again referring to the House of Representatives or the lower branch of the legislature in different states. He says they changed so much that you can't find stability there. It can only be found in a number so small that a sensible degree of the praise and blame of public measures be the portion of each individual, or in an assembly so durably invested with public trust that the pride and consequence of its members may be sensibly incorporated with the reputation and prosperity of the community. The half-yearly representatives of Rhode Island would probably have been little affected in their deliberations on the iniquitous measures of that state, but arguments drawn from the light in which such measures would be viewed by foreign nations. or even by the sister states, whilst it can scarcely be doubted that if the concurrence of a select and stable body had been necessary, a regard to national character alone would have prevented the calamities under which that misguided people is now laboring. See how mad he's at the state of Rhode Island? Because they did not even send any delegates to the Federal Convention. Because their representatives were being elected every 6 months, and you could never count on them doing the right thing. They were always causing problems for the Confederacy. So he says, look, if they had a body, if they had a legislature that was not elected 6 months, if it had permanence, if it were elected for a longer period of time, maybe it would have really put the interest of the whole community against the short-sighted interests of some of those factious people. So another thing he's saying here is that if you give authority to a smaller group of people because they know they'll be held accountable, the chances are they will take pride and do their job right. Whereas if you give it to a large body like the House of Representatives, then they can always pass the buck, pass the blame. They can say, well, it's not just me, it's those 10 other people that are not doing their job. So he says that's why we don't want too many senators in the Senate, because we want them to take pride in the authority and the responsibility given to them, and this way they will do their job right. So keep that in mind.